Hi everyone, I am Jess Crow with Woodworkers Guild of America. We have our Getting Started with Resin Challenge going on right now with our sponsor, Total Boat. It appears that we're a bit laggy, so I'm really sorry about that if this is doing that for you. Hopefully it'll catch up, so just please bear with us. Anyway, back to it. The challenge is based on my own project, and I'm excited to see what you guys have been doing with them. 2 of the 5 projects have already been sent out to the challenge participants. So if you're interested in joining, click on the link in the description. Over the next 15 to 30 minutes, I'm going to be answering you guys' questions and giving you some tips. I have the challenge in front of me, so I can directly answer questions if you have a question on each step. I already have some questions that came in from the challenge participants last time, but if you have more questions, go ahead and I have to look at my phone in order to see the questions come in, but go ahead and leave them in the comment section and I will absolutely get to them. On my end, I'm lagging terribly, but hopefully not on you guys's, so don't shoot the messenger, it's the internet. So how are you guys doing on the projects? I do want to address some questions that we had on the YouTube stream and the Facebook stream last time, and that way, in case you missed those, you guys can see them now. One of the questions that we had was, here. Joe asked, I see epoxy being used on cutting boards, but I thought you weren't supposed to cut on epoxy, mainly because it isn't food safe. Could I use food safe epoxy on my cutting boards? And that is a fantastic question, and it's one that comes up all the time, so never be afraid to ask it. Here's the deal. Some epoxies are food contact safe. So you could totally have samples. You could take this little coaster thing that I have here, and you could put some cheese or some meat or something on it, but you cannot cut on it. Now, let me back up a little bit. If I took this and I added all this color to it and I didn't put a flood coat over it, and by a flood coat, I mean just a completely unaltered version of a food safe epoxy, then I could not put food on this because I've had color and stuff to it, and it kind of takes that quality away. So, and no matter what, I can't cut on this. Even if I have that flood coat, you can't cut on it because you do stand the risk of chipping it. My best advice is to treat it like a countertop. You could drop some food on your countertop. You could pick it up. It's probably safe. But you wouldn't take a serrated knife to your countertop and just sit there and cut away and then expect not to either pick up some particles of the countertop or, just ruin it. So do not cut on any epoxy, okay? And again, going back to that, if you are going to use it as like a charcuterie board, go ahead and put a flood coat on top of it of just clear epoxy. Then you can go ahead and use it as long as the epoxy is labeled for food safe. I'm going to check my phone and see if there's anything on there. Okay, so far so good. So you guys might be on the Aurora clock, or maybe you're just calling it a tree line clock or any of those kind of things. So we should have been into making our circle. This one has the elements of both adding paint or colorant to the epoxy, as well as painting the tree line over the epoxy. So if you're not comfortable doing that, I was thinking another thing that you could do is just print out your design. I just so happen to have a Total Boat sticker, but if I wanted this boat, just print this out, cut out using razor knife scissors, and I just so happen to have an ocean coaster here. Then I could take and I could get this in the right direction here. I could put my boat on top of my epoxy, and then I could do another layer of epoxy over it, and no one would be the wiser. So if you're not feeling very comfortable with the painting aspect of it, just take a design, cut it out, lay it on top of it, epoxy over it. If you keep a nice tight line, or even if you use transparency film or contact paper, you won't even really be able to see it under a layer of epoxy. So that's a good way to kind of cut corners a little bit or give you something that you wanted but you weren't sure. So that's the clock. Now, when I was going through trying to figure out what projects to do for the challenge, I wanted to make sure that we started really small and there is that sense of achievement because everybody wants to like be good at stuff. You don't want to start something and suck at it. So choosing the projects were based on kind of 5 skills that you need to develop with resin in order to be able to do anything you want. Very first one is just mixing. The clock is a great thing. It's small, it uses a small batch, and it uses color. So that's what hangs people up a lot. So that was kind of your crash course introduction into mixing and color. All right. So that was a big part of why I chose that project first. Then the second project you guys are working on is the bench. So the bench introduces you, and I'm just flipping the pages here. Bench introduces you to a larger pour. It's one thing to be doing something this size, whereas I have another sample here. These right here, these are just junk. These are things that I didn't like, and I just put them on a board, but it's a lot harder to control the epoxy when you're covering a larger area. So the bench teaches you how to take the skills that you've learned with adding color to it and then translating that onto a larger design. Worst case with the bench, you have to scrape it off, start again, but it still doesn't use a lot of epoxy. If you've looked at the levels that you're needing for the bench that I didn't use probably more than 30, 40 ounces of epoxy. Might seem like a lot, but it really actually isn't because that was for the entire thing. So from the bench, we've got somewhere in here, and now these might not be particularly in order, but I have the charcuterie board, which does the lacing. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but it's got all this lacing in here. That's a trick that most people love learning because you can use it in so many things. So you're taking the first 2 things that you've learned, and now you're learning how to make those cells and the little pops that everybody always struggles with. We got some questions on that, actually. I think I want to say on the Facebook, or somebody emailed me about it. They wanted to know why when they mixed their white, it was dropping right to the bottom. And that was because you have to mix it very, very well. And you also have to wait until the white has these little carbonated bubbles in it. If you're following along with the tutorials, you'll see exactly how to do that as well as the video. So that was part of the reason that I picked the charcuterie board, was strictly to teach you how to do lacing. Let's see. We work our way all the way up to a table. So if you ever want to make a river table, now is where you're going to learn how to make a river table and keep it nice and easy. And actually, I think that is our last project. So we have the charcuterie board. No, we don't. We have the coasters. So the coasters were just a fun thing. The coasters are nice and small. Like I said, if you own a CNC, you can batch produce those out. And even if you don't own a CNC, you can make those in huge batches. I brought over another example, and this is cut on my CNC. So what I did was, if you take a big board like this, whatever your CNC size is, you can do this on a hand router as well. Do your design on the entire board. Lay your board down and cut it on your CNC. As you can see, I've got a real nice clean edge on here. And this was just an experiment. So when you're thinking about the things that you're learning in the resin challenge, these are things that you can do. You can take those skills and translate them into so many other things and feel really confident about it. When you look at this, you can see all the color and all the movement. This is strictly just a few colors of epoxy. It's a play on this, which is one of the things that you guys are going to learn how to do. Like the river table. What we're doing in the river table is we're filling a void. So what's important about filling a void is knowing how much epoxy to use, knowing how to, sand around it and what to do with spillover. I have this teeny tiny little heart here, and I don't know how well you can see it, but this is another example of filling a void. There's a tiny little section of red in here, of red epoxy, and this cute little heart. So when we're learning river tables, we're learning how to prep our substrate. We're learning how to not pour over. So that's kind of the finale. And traditionally, you would use a thick set. I just so happen to have some here. Still in a package, but you can still see it kind of. The Total Boat thick set. This stuff is like liquid. So if you can hear it, it kind of makes a mess if you don't prep your substrate right. So it's really frustrating to learn on. If you spill it, it does this. See how this one is leaked all the way through here? And this was because I did not prep this box well enough, this little MDF box. So learning to use the thick set can be super frustrating. That's why we're going to learn on either the tabletop or the maker epoxy. So again, these skills can pretty much teach you anything you want to learn. Let's see, we have a question from Calvin. Where do you get ideas for what your colored background should look like? I like your clock, but would like to maybe use other colors. I personally draw inspiration from nature. It's a huge part of what I look at. But that being said, other places that I think people can draw inspiration from is actually look at like your work environment. Look at the things, if you work at a desk, look at the things that you like looking at. Is it a certain picture that you walk by? Is there a certain view out your window? Then make note of those colors. If you like, Arizona sunsets, Google a picture of an Arizona sunset and pull the colors out of there. So for me, it's super overwhelming because I'm like, holy cow, there's too many freaking colors in the world. There's so much inspiration and so many bloody things for me. But I do respect that some people have a little bit harder time with that. So cars. If you're into cars or motorcycles, look at the cars and the motorcycle colors that you kind of gravitate towards. Do you love a black bike with a flame on it? Do you like a red bike with a white pinstripe on it? If those are the colors that you like, use them. Be happy with whatever colors you like. Just don't overthink it. The only one that I would be very, very careful with is black. Black is very, very dominating in epoxy, black and dark colors in general. So kind of use those very judiciously, and you can always add more. Black is a color that you really can't take away with epoxy work, so just be careful of that one. Trying to think of other places that you could grab inspiration from. Like I said, trucks, artwork, flowers. Ask your kids to pick the colors. If you have kids, they're great at picking colors. The next thing you know, you're going to be making like a hot pink, fluorescent orange thing. So that's a good thing. Let's see, Mo. What tools help me cut neatly? So are we talking about like cutting like this? Because this was just a CNC on a router or using a router. I love to use my table saw. So if I was going to cut, say, once I got this demolded, if this was bigger, this would be fine in a bandsaw. But if this was like a table, I would just run this through the table saw. You can plane these down. This one is very textural and kinky, but if I wanted to, I could run it through my planer, just clean the blades off after you're done. Trying to think of what other tools. So Mo, if you have more specific questions on what kind of tools you're looking, what kind of things you'd like to cut, I could probably answer that a little bit better for you. I'm going to move on to Kelly's question. Can I put a photo on the wood before I lay my epoxy down? You can. So you can, but here's the but. What you're going to want to do is take your photo. Let's go ahead and use our little handy dandy Total Boat sticker. Take your photo, put it, this isn't necessarily big enough, but let's say this is our substrate. Use a spray adhesive, lay it down on your substrate, then use, it's called Triple Thick, and I believe it's by Krylon. It is an archival formulated clear coat. It's very different than like a polyurethane spray. It's a rattle can. It's a spray. It's very different than that, and it's made for protecting documents and items. But what you want to do is spray it really lightly. Don't go heavy-handed your first spray. Continue to spray multiple layers, and it dries super fast. Like in 3 minutes, you're ready for your next recoat. So make sure that you're protecting whatever it is first, because otherwise it'll bleed out. And also, I really, really highly recommend people never, ever, ever use the original of whatever it is. If it's something that, like God forbid, something went wrong that you cannot replace, do not use it. Go take it down to your local store and get a copy of it. Do something in order to make a duplicate if you can, but don't use the original. So hopefully that helps answers your question on how to do that. And see, Aaron, what is the mold release material I see people using? It's like an easy release sheet people cut to fit. They're probably using PTech, which I do have some around here, which is a plastic, or I'm going to grab it for you just because I want to show it to you, show you what it looks like. Give me 2 seconds. I'm not far, I'm just on the other side of my workbench. Okay. Thanks, guys. If my camera moved, I would have taken you with me, but I'm not that cool yet. So this is, it's basically just like acrylic. I mean, you can use acrylic, but PTech is usually white. And what is fantastic about PTech is you can use it over and over and over and over again. If I wanted to make this mold here that is a mess, like you can see it blew out and everything, if I had made that out of the PTech, and that's actually why I have this piece cut, if you would notice the sizes, is I can make this box and you can reuse it hundreds and hundreds of times. The only time that you won't be able to reuse it is actually if you break it. And it's really, really hard to break. They use it a lot of times in airplane and boating applications. So it is made to be crazy strong. If you're making more than, I'd probably say 5 of the exact same thing, it is so worth the investment in making a PTech box. Here, I go to my local plastic store. So you might have to call around and see where they sell it. I know some of the larger box stores do sell it, but it's usually very thin. And I would not recommend anything less than a 1/2 inch to 1 inch material. Inch would probably be a little bit overkill, but 1/2 inch would be a good size box because you need to be able to drill into it or put wing nuts into it. Another thing that people use is melamine. This is great because nothing epoxy-wise will stick into it if you have a good melamine. Now, again, okay, I think we're back. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. The way that this has to work, we're kind of bouncing through a bunch of different things. So sometimes technology apparently doesn't like us. But where I was at And I'm sorry that happened, guys. I really wish it wouldn't, but there's not much I can do about it. What I was saying is that melamine is another great choice because the epoxy won't stick to it. Just make sure to pre-drill it first in order to prevent this shifting and cracking that you would see with a melamine box, with a particle board box. The other problem with particle board is, as you can see, I didn't tape very well, so it leaks through. You won't have that problem with melamine. It won't seep into it because it has this protective layer on it. Just make sure you're getting a good one, nice and smooth finish on it, and it'll work great. You can reuse these if you unscrew and screw them. You can reuse these quite a few times. So that's another great option if you want that. Let's see here. Oh, and also some people do use like a mold release spray. I have tried one of them and I didn't like it because it kind of caused some spots to not cure properly. That being said, it's probably been about a year since I've tried one. I know there's some newer ones on the market, and that's all they say is they say like silicone mold release, or some of them are even starting to label as epoxy mold release. You can use those and you can spray them inside of your box if you need a little bit of extra oomph, to get the project out of the box. John says, what is the best resin for pen and bottle stopper blanks? Thanks for asking, John. It would actually be, so there's a couple brands. I'll start with Total Boat, but then I'll tell you a couple others that I'm familiar with and that people like. I like the Total Boat Thick Set for that. It's a great casting resin. It's super duper clear. Again, I keep going back to this one, but I'm going to move it closer. This is a great example. You can see all the colors that I have in there. This is actually a blank, and it's going to be for a knife handle. And this is just an example of how clear it can get. Illuminate makes one that I know people are super fond of. I personally have never used it, but that is another good brand. Trying to think of some other ones, but if people have any suggestions, feel free to drop them in there. But Total Boat Thick Set is my go-to for that. And then if that's not available in your area, you can look for that. Speaking of that made me think, Total Boat is still shipping. I know most of us are probably either sitting at home or we're in kind of a social distancing situation. Total Boat is still shipping out. They have limited warehouse staff, but they have had no lag in shipping, and you can still place your orders. They're getting them out. Turnaround time is great. Another great thing with Total Boat is you actually don't have to go anywhere else. So I just got my order. That's why I have these pieces here. But they send you mixing sticks, and they send you cups. So if you haven't got your order in for the challenge, definitely go ahead and check them out because you get cups and mixing sticks. I think they're pretty slim on gloves, but usually gloves go out with the orders, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. Let's see. I think we have another question. Let me scroll up here. Dennis, I want to route a boat with lines only on a 10-inch board. How wide and deep should the grooves be so the epoxy will not ooze out? Thinking that's ooze. I will be coloring it blue and I've never done epoxy before. Great to have you start playing with epoxy, Dennis. So let me reread this again. I want to route a boat with lines only on a 10-inch board. How wide and deep should the grooves be so the epoxy will not ooze out? Okay, so two questions. Two answers. One, it depends on which epoxy you're using, and I would suggest, my suggestion to you is to use either the Maker Epoxy, which is that label, or the tabletop, which I don't have right here. And the reason for that is because it's a higher viscosity and it's going to really help prevent a lot of the oozing that you would see if you'd use the thick set. So that's part one. Then for the actual depth and width, I am a big fan of detail. So I usually don't go over a 1/4 inch if I'm doing a design. I'm trying to think if I have anything that has a design around me, but I don't at the moment. So I like a 1/4 inch wide, and then I will go down so we need to account for any sanding you might have to do. So I'll go down about an 1/8 further than what I want my design to be. So that being said, usually, and again, this is of course going to depend on what you got for overall depth, But if I was doing a design on this, I would probably actually bring this all the way down to a solid quarter. If the design was super intricate and I anticipated doing a lot of sanding, I might even take it down a 1/2 inch in order to accommodate for some spillover or if there was an issue. Make sure that your project is super flat to begin with, because if we have a project that's high on one side and low on the other side, when we route that out, that's just going to be emphasized. And then when we go to sand it, we're going to have an area down here that doesn't have any epoxy because we sanded it completely off in this. I might have done that a few times when I was learning how to do epoxy work and ended up wiping out entire boards because I just didn't make that depth big enough. So I would really suggest a minimum of a 1/4 inch, more if you can. Parker asks, if epoxy is food safe, maybe touch it on the cutting board again? Maybe touch on the cutting board again. Oh, okay, yeah, sorry about that. I was looking to see if I had a cutting board around, but I don't. Okay, so what we talked about earlier. We're just gonna go back to this. This is my little cutting board here. I've added epoxy to my cutting board, either in that kind of river style where people take the 2 slabs and they turn them out, and then you've got, I'll just draw on this. Okay, here's my fake little river cutting board. All right, so I have my cutting board. This is all epoxy through here. I have my slabs. I've got color in here. Typically, people usually have color in here. I can't put food on this because I've added color to it. So the thought process again behind that is, even though my epoxy here, my maker epoxy is food safe, when I add color to it, I'm adding an unknown element that the manufacturer did not count on me adding, no matter what the manufacturer is. It doesn't have to be Total Boat. It can be any resin epoxy manufacturer. I've added this beautiful color to it into my cutting board. In order to be able to even put food on that, I have to do a complete flood coat over that area. So in a flood coat, I mean, it is completely 100% the manufacturer's labeled directions for their food contact safe epoxy. Now, I can't really dive into it because there's this blurred line of okay, well, let's see. I made my my little river serving tray here, but then I finished it off in a completely food safe finishing oil. So technically, I've created another barrier between my epoxy and my food. That's up to you guys. Figure that out. Proceed with that how you want to. I would still discourage cutting on it. And then just be mindful of what you're doing with it. Everybody here is an adult. Everybody's playing with their own stuff, and I can give you the information and hope that you do your research and know what you're working with, but I can't even barely police my 16-year-old kid. I mean, that's not necessarily true, but I'm certainly not going to try to tell you guys what you're doing wrong. Those are just my suggestions. Those are Total Boat suggestions. They're some of the very first people to openly say, do not cut on our stuff. Do not market it as a food cutting board. It's a serving tray. Let's see. Erin, I missed the beginning of this video, but are you going to cover planing after your pour cures? Yeah, I mean, we can do that right now. So I keep showing you the same 3 examples, and I'm sorry. But if I was going to take this out and plane this down, all you have to do is just start with microscopic levels of planing. Don't go into it thinking that you're going to immediately shave off a 1/4 inch. You want to start really small, because no matter how good we are with epoxy, I'm trying to see here. I don't know if you guys can see or not, but there's a high spot right in through here. Again, you might not be able to see that. If so, I hope so. But there was still a high spot. So I'm going to have to shave those down progressively. And it's just like with wood. I mean, it's if you've got an uneven piece of wood and you're shimming it in order to start planing it correctly, you start small. Same thing with epoxy. The other thing is clean your knives afterwards. Sometimes epoxy is a bit hard on planers if you're using a very, very hard, or if you've got things added to it like this. I mean, this is a prime example. This is a mess. This thing is multi-textural. It's really going to have to go super slow or it'll chew up my blades. It'll absolutely chew up those. So hopefully that answered that question. Ahmad says, will you give some advice on how to prepare your wood before pouring? Sure. Let's see. Super duper basics, and we do cover this. So if you're not signed up for the challenge, make sure that you are clicking that link and getting signed up, because you're going to get, let's see, how many pages is this? Bad chicken. You're going to get a 10-page in total when it's all said and done. 10 pages of me yammering on about everything epoxy, including all the prep work. And in addition to that, we have an entire epoxy class coming out. So anything that you miss here, make sure you're checking that out. But so to answer your question, every wood is a little bit different. If you have a super oily wood, you really need to clean it down with some denatured alcohol first, because that wood will interfere with the epoxy being able to adhere to it. So if you're using an oily wood, clean it off. If you're using MDF, like this is, prime it. You want to prime this first. If you're using birch, you want to, again, prime that because it's going to seep. My now 1500 example, you can already see where this seeped through. And if that's strictly because I didn't tape it well enough, if you're using a tape, make sure that you tape everything just like crazy. Use silicone. So, sorry, my hair is making my nose itchy. But it really depends on what type of wood. If the one thing I do recommend, again, and this touches back, a lot of people will finish their wood before they pour. Now, if you're going to do that, let's say you have a design and you absolutely need to finish it first. If you're going to do that, you need to give it ample time to fully be done seeping into the wood. So let's say you're using Rubio. Rubio is one of my favorite finishes. If I, for some reason, would have to finish first, I need to wait, like, I'm not kidding you, like a month before I pour epoxy on that, or else it will not get in there. And you also then need to sand lightly. You don't have to go crazy. Just lightly scuff sand wherever I'm going to try to put my epoxy. The nice thing with Rubio, for instance, is that you can put it right over epoxy and it doesn't alter the finish. We talk about that actually with the bench. So if you sign up for nothing else, sign up, look at how we do the bench, and that talks about finishing before that. So for prepping, that's pretty much it. Just make sure you're level. Make sure that if you're using something that is porous, you've primed it if you can. If you're using an oily wood, make sure that you've cleaned it with denatured alcohol a couple of times to remove some of those oils. I think that's kind of it, mostly. Everything is, there's like 1,000 offshoots that we could do with that. Maureen asks, what is the minimum thickness required to make a 24 by 24 inch slab table? Sorry about that. I haven't talked to anybody in like weeks, so now my voice is getting dry. What is the minimum thickness required to make a 24 by 24 inch slab table? I guess, so that leads into a couple questions. Are you doing like the river style pour? So you've only got, you know, this much material. You're going to want to have, I guess it's more of a comfortability. I would say and suggest 1.5 inches would probably be the minimum that I would be comfortable at having that at. Most of my work is closer to the 1 3/4 inches, just for added kind of strength and durability. Again, there's a lot of elements. Do you have legs, for instance, that are going to be being able to support some of the weight on the epoxy section? That's a big deal, because if you've got some help there, then you could probably get away with 1.5 inches. Gosh, it really is subjective, but that's kind of my final answer. Let's see. I think we're almost done. So if you're late, don't worry. You will get the projects regardless as well. So make sure that you sign up in the email. And also make sure you're sharing your projects. I want to see what you guys are doing. And I want to see even if you're doing completely like your direction sucked. I'm doing it my way. I want to see what you're doing and I want to learn too. So if you haven't signed up, go ahead and sign up. Doesn't matter if you're late, you'll still get all the projects. Make sure you're tagging Woodworkers Guild of America in your posts. I want to see what you're doing. You can also seek me out, Jess Crow. That's under Crow Creek Designs. If you got technical questions that you feel like you're not getting answered, reach out to Total Boat. Their support staff is great. So I think that's about it. We've got 30 minutes into this, and we're here to answer your questions. Try to come back in the next hour and get anybody's that I may have missed. So don't be alarmed if I didn't get to you on this round. And we'll be back. And I'm hoping to see some progress from you guys. So I will be checking in later on next week. And have a great day. It is beautiful and sunny here in Alaska. We are up to, I want to say 10, 11 hours of daylight. So I'm happy. I will talk to you guys all later.